This episode of Literary Treks is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and to help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading, in case I got bored.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Literary Treks, your dedicated Star Trek books and comics show here on the Trek FM network. I'm just one of your hosts, Dan Gunther, and joining me, as he does every week, is the wonderful, resplendent, fresh from seeing Star Trek Discovery, Bruce Gibson. Bruce, how's it going today?
It's going great. Yes, as we record this, I'm just coming back from Los Angeles, seeing the preview, the premiere of Discovery. It was wonderful. It was great. All that stuff. Of course, everybody who's listening to this now, I hope you've watched Discovery. And because we'll touch a little bit on that when we talk about our feature today.
Yeah, definitely. And so, as we're recording this, it hasn't come out yet. But Bruce luckily got to go to the premiere, and I'm insanely jealous. But soon we will all be able to see it. And of course, like Bruce said, you guys already all have. So I'm jealous of everybody here right now, not just Bruce, but the people listening to my voice. So let's just get to the news, and I'm not going to dwell on it.
Yeah, because I don't want you to get depressed.
Yeah. So we have some news for the December comics coming out from IDW. We've got Boldly Go number 15 is coming out. And I don't know if you got a chance to look at this cover, Bruce, but what did you think of this cover with these kind of robot, it looks like robot Spock, Kirk, and Uhura?
I'm looking at it right now for the first time. It's kind of weird, you know? Yeah, it's like they've been dipped in silver.
Yeah, they're like Silver Surfer / robot Star Trek people.
Right. So I'm very curious because this is part of the IDIC miniseries. It says it's part 3 of 6.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, the IDIC series is that one that takes place over multiple colliding realities. And apparently one of them, we've got these Silver Surfer robot people. So that looks interesting. Also coming in December, we have another New Visions comic from John Byrne. This one's called The Hunger. And it goes as follows. For thousands of years, it had drifted above the outer rim of the galaxy, draining life from all the worlds it found there. Now it has learned of the banquet of populous planets near the heart of the Milky Way and is heading there at terrifying speed, with only the Enterprise standing in its way. So that's The Hunger coming in December. What do you think of that one?
I'm very interested to read this. I don't know. The teaser didn't really do anything for me, but I'm just kind of like, okay, well, let's check it out because these New Visions have been pretty good and interesting recently. So I went, and especially since we talked about photo novels not that long ago, it's like, I'm kind of into this right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And also coming in December is Star Trek Discovery number 3. This is a regular-sized issue, 32 pages at $3.99, written by Mike Johnson and Kirsten Beyer, with art by Tony Chasteen. So a very short blurb for this one. The official comics tie-in to the blockbuster new Star Trek television show continues here. Secrets of the new characters are revealed as Star Trek embarks on a bold new journey.
How do they know it's a blockbuster already?
Yeah, exactly. And man, giving nothing away. Actually, that reminds me, this is a little rant time. I always wonder when we get novelizations of movies and stuff, it always says the hit new movie from blah, blah, blah. And the movie hasn't come out yet.
Right.
How do they know? Yeah. Anyway, that's one of my little rants. Anyway, Star Trek Discovery number 3 will come with 4 different covers. We don't get any previews of them at this time, but we have 4 variant covers. Cover A by Tony Chastain. Cover B is a photo cover. A Ships of the Line cover by Declan Shalvey and Jordi Belair. And a variant cover by George Kaltsoudas. So, yeah, interesting. Got to collect them all.
Yep, all 4.
Excellent. Well, we also got a new comic this week to review, and that one is Boldly Go number 11. And this one kind of goes back to those early days of the ongoing comic where they took an element from the original series and explored it in a new and different way. And this one covers a character we've seen before in the original series episode, Whom Gods Destroy. And that is Captain, or dare I say, Lord Garth of Izar. What were your initial impressions of this comic, Bruce?
Okay, so I got to the first page and I see the captain there, and I thought, okay, is this somebody we've seen before? And I thought maybe it was Kelsey Grammer, a younger Kelsey Grammer. What was it? Bateman? What was his name? Was that it? Captain?
Morgan Bateson.
Yeah, Bateson. And but no. So then, of course, we figure out it's not him. It's Captain Garth, which sounds really odd to say Captain Garth. He's actually is he a Commodore? No, he's Captain in this.
Captain, yeah.
So yeah, it was kind of good to see that, and they're in the uniforms that are very similar to what we saw on the USS Kelvin in the Star Trek 09 movie.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, they actually borrow some stuff from the novel universe. In the novel Garth of Izar, he was in command of the USS Heisenberg at the Battle of Axanar. And we see here he's in command of the Heisenberg. And I kind of wonder, does the dedication plaque to the Heisenberg, does it have the motto, "I'm the one who knocks"?
Well, you just put it out there in the universe, and maybe we'll see that someday.
I really hope so. That would make me happy. Excellent. Well, we don't want to get into spoilers for this comic for sure. It's basically quick overview. We see Garth at the Battle of Axanar, and then we kind of flash forward to Kirk's time at the Academy and his meeting with Captain Garth. And we know from the original series episode, Garth visits the planet Antos, and basically that's where he goes insane and he learns this shape-shifting ability. And much the same happens here, but I would say in a different way, or it's revealed in a different way from the original series episode. So, like I said, I don't want to give too much away. It's the first part of an ongoing story. Looks like it's going to be kind of an interesting story going forward. What did you think of how it tackled the story of Captain Garth?
Well, of course, because it's a different timeline, it doesn't play out exactly what we saw in the Prime timeline, but there is some references back to characters that we met in the ongoing series, and then tying it in with Captain Garth. And I started to wonder if he was going to veer off something totally different, but then I saw how it brings it back to what we saw in the original series episode. And that's, like you said, there's a different part to it. So it's definitely an interesting setup to the story. So I'm very curious to see how this is going to play out now that it's been set up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It's pretty much all set up. So we're getting into the situation, and yeah, by the end, I'm curious to see where this goes next. Garth has never been really someone I've been really fascinated with.
Yeah, me either.
I mean, Whom Gods Destroy is not a strong episode,
No.
but it does establish some interesting things about Starfleet history and Garth's past. So, kind of interested, but we'll see where it goes from here, I guess.
Yeah. And, it's, again, Kirk isn't in command of the Enterprise, and we're showing that it looks like, they start talking about how they're going to eventually go back to the Enterprise once it's ready, and then he'll have to leave some of the crew of the Endeavor behind. And he's gotten to like them and got to know them, and the two crews intermingling, and then they'll have to separate at some point. So I kind of like that setup that, at some point here in the near future, he's going to go back to the Enterprise, which of course probably won't happen until we get a commitment on this fourth movie. Where is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm wondering is this story, is the Boldly Go series kind of in limbo until we get that figured out. So yeah, I don't know. Will the fourth movie show them taking command of the new Enterprise, or will it be they're already out there in the new Enterprise? I guess until we know that, we're really not sure how this comic story is going to end up wrapping up.
Yeah,
so.
And I don't think they know that. And I don't mean IDW, but I think CBS in general. I don't think anybody, well, not CBS, Paramount. I don't think they know that in general, but I would expect that when we get a fourth movie, notice I said when, not if, because I'm trying to be optimistic here. But when we get the fourth movie, I think it's just going to be they're on the ship. I don't think it's going to be, some kind of story like Star Trek 4 where they play it the whole movie and then we can get to the Enterprise at the end. It's now, right? I think it's going to be they're on the A.
That's my guess too, because we do see at the end of Beyond, in that fast motion thing, the Enterprise gets built and then launches and then flies around through the credits. So yeah, they'll probably be on the ship, but yeah, hopefully we hear something about a fourth movie soon. Of course, other big things are happening in the Star Trek universe right now. So, wait for that to kind of pass, I guess, first. Speaking of those other things going on in the Star Trek universe, our feature today ties in a little bit to that. Part of the reason we chose the novel we did. So what do you say we jump over to the feature and welcome our special guest?
Ooh, I like special guests.
So today we're discussing a classic novel, a hardcover novel published back in March of 1994. And that one is Sarek by A.C. Crispin, definitely a veteran Star Trek author and well known for some very memorable stories throughout the Trek literary universe. And joining us for this conversation today is friend of the show and second-time guest now, Justin Oser. Justin, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me back. And now I am officially an associate producer. So what you said last time is true.
I won't stick my foot in my mouth this time and call you out as such.
Just predicting the future, that's all.
Yeah, exactly. I'm prescient. I've mastered space and time somehow, or something like that.
Justin, would you like a cup of Earl Grey?
Yes, I'd like it hot, please.
See, now we're going to get Dayton and Amy mad at us because they've called us out for not having a properly stocked green room. And now we're offering tea to Justin. So
yeah, Dayton is back there still asking for the minibar. Any progress on that?
Well, I told him that, in addition to the peanut M&Ms that I tossed in there, I'm going to try and palm some of those mini bottles of vodka off of the next time I fly. And those Cheez-Its, they always hand out Cheez-Its and I hate them. So, we'll throw those in there.
Well, I did see him back there. I found him hiding because he always hides. And I found him hiding behind a couch and I said, I have some Earl Grey. And he said, yeah, try again. So I guess he's not wanting the Earl Grey. So I have to find something maybe a little harder.
Earl Grey with
drink.
a shot of vodka?
I think he would like that.
Awesome. Well, as I mentioned, we're talking about Sarek today, and I kind of wanted to start out by asking, what is your experience with this novel? Have you read it before? Is this your first time, or how are you coming to this novel? Justin, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so this was my second time reading it. The first time I read it actually was only a couple months ago. I've just kind of been cycling through different books that I find at thrift stores or that people recommend, and I read it a couple months ago, and it was an interesting experience to reread it and see what I got out of it this time.
Awesome.
Yeah, I read it when it came out in '94, and I haven't read it since until now. Again, it's one of these things where you read so many of these novels and not something that you've read 20 years ago, you remember little bits and pieces, but not the whole thing. So it's always great now to go back and reread these and go, oh yeah, I remember this, or I don't remember this part at all, but this is interesting. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah. This is actually my first time reading this novel. So I've never read this before, just this past week. And yeah, definitely a lot of thoughts about this book for sure. So great experience reading it for the first time too, I have to say. So another thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was the time period that this book takes place in. So we're post Star Trek VI. The Klingons and the Federation have entered in the Khitomer peace accords, and there's kind of detente going on. We're post to the explosion of Praxis. The Klingon homeworld is still threatened, and a big part of that peace process is the Federation, of course, helping out the Klingon Empire and ensuring their survival. And one thing that struck me as odd with this novel is if you watch Star Trek VI, they're all retiring and the ship's going to be decommissioned. But in this book, along with some other novels that also take place after Star Trek VI, the crew is still out there doing missions. Kirk's still the captain, Spock's his first officer. The whole crew is still together on the Enterprise, except, of course, for Sulu, who's presumably off on the Excelsior doing his captain-y stuff. But I notice a lot of other novels, there's a lot of novels that are like the final mission of Captain Kirk and crew. There's like 20 of them by now. But this one doesn't even take that tack. It's just they're still out there doing missions.
Yeah, they don't address it.
Think of that?
Yeah, they don't address why, they're still there. Because you're right, there's several novels that take place after, quote, they're retired, but they're still on the ship. And I think I remember one novel where, they're being called back, they're just, okay, guys, it's time to do this. It's time to go back, and they're resisting. But yeah, this is just, they're still out there. It's never addressed why they still have the ship. And I think there was a bit of an indication here that retirement's coming soon. But I don't know why they kept doing that. Yeah. I don't really, one book would be fine, but because there's so many, including this, it really just stretches it. I guess because at the end of 6, they, at the end, they didn't really turn around. They just kept going.
Yeah, Dan, I had noticed this aspect as well. And for me, I haven't read all that many novels that are supposed to take place in that kind of short window between the end of Star Trek VI and the start of Generations. And I was like, okay, they're out there. Why? What's going on? What did I miss? Right. And, I guess, as I was reading about it more, there's some kind of explanation in Best Destiny that something comes up on their way back and they have to, and I guess they keep going out there. Why not? Right.
Yeah. Like I think in Best Destiny, they were headed back and then they detected the Bill of Rights,
ship,
their distress call.
Not like a big copy of the Bill of Rights in space.
Oh yeah. No. The USS Bill of Rights.
Hey, and Lincoln.
If you can have a Lincoln. Yeah.
But in this novel, if I recall correctly, there's like one line I noticed where I forget who it was talking to Kirk, but they say something like, "Oh, I was really pleased to hear that you were still going to be out there doing things."
He's like, "Yep."
Yeah. It's great, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. And that was it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yeah. It struck me as a little odd, but I do like this setting because what you get to see is things like, seeing Kronos and there's this ring of debris around it from Praxis exploding, and just thinking about that and all the reverberations and everything they have to deal with is kind of interesting. So even if they have to kind of waive it for why they're still out there, I think it's still a pretty interesting period to look at.
Mm-hmm. And the political landscape is really, full of possibilities. So yeah, I'm really happy to see it at this time too.
And then the other thing I noticed in here is it seemed it was an error, not an era, but an error It was they kept referring to really the events of Star Trek 3 as being 3 years ago. Now this is 2293, and they keep saying about, oh yeah, 3 years ago, Kirk fought Krug,
Wasn't it 7 or 8 years between those two?
Yeah, and I thought
that would be around 2285,
Yeah, I think
86.
so,
yeah,
I think.
so it should have been about 8 years. And I thought, well, this novel came out in 94, maybe they didn't have the timeline all worked out. But then if you read the letters or the journal entries that Amanda does, she has it as 2293 of the current events, and it's referred to as 2285 when Spock died.
Yeah. So it is like 8 years. That I didn't notice.
It is
that.
8 years, but the author kept mentioning 3. So in my head canon, every time 3 years was mentioned by the characters, they were on Cronus. And I thought, well, it's 3
Klingon years? Ooh, maybe.
They're just, being thoughtful and converting to the local time, I guess. Yeah, sure. We'll go with that. Absolutely. Well, a big part of this story, obviously, the title of the book is Sarek, and Sarek plays a very big role in this book. But something that I was really excited about when I started this book is Amanda is also a huge part of this book, which makes sense. And specifically the bond between Sarek and Amanda as husband and wife, I think was explored really well in this book. And something that occurred to me was this kind of telepathic bond that they have. I know it's something that's existed in Star Trek before, but a lot of it really reminded me of T'Pol and Trip in Enterprise. And I wonder, because especially during the 4th season, I know some prolific Star Trek writers actually got writing credits on the Enterprise series. So there was kind of a melding of those two worlds a little bit. And I'm wondering if maybe the writers on Enterprise got some inspiration from this book for that relationship.
I think it's very possible. I hadn't actually thought about it before you brought it up, but that would make sense for that kind of long range telepathic bond that they seem to have. I mean, is that something that in some of the other books you see that represented as something that can be across such a long range?
I don't recall.
There
may be. Yeah. But I was the same. I thought about Enterprise. I was like, oh my gosh, it's like T'Pol and Trip. And I'm with you, Dan. I think they probably got the idea from this book. I mean, I don't know how much they mined the books when they were doing Enterprise. And like you said, some other authors were involved. But it seems very much a coincidence how the two very much parallel each other.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, in the pantheon of Star Trek novels, this is a big one. Like, this is one that a lot of people have read. It's kind of one of the bigger, more well-known novels, I think, in the Star Trek literary universe. Would you guys kind of agree with that, I think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I picked it up a couple of months ago is because I had heard so much about it that I wanted to check it out. And I've always loved Sarek as a character, so that was a draw too. So, yeah, I think you hear about it a lot.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that bond between Sarek and Amanda, I really loved that. I think it was, Sarek is so often shown as a very cold character. I mean, he's Vulcan, of course. It's part of their nature to be unemotional. But, even as early as Journey to Babel, there were those little hints that there was this very special bond between him and Amanda. And I mean, why would he marry a human woman if there was no, nothing there? And, even bringing in the JJ universe, when Sarek admits to Spock that the reason he married Amanda was because he loved her, He may say to publicly that it seemed logical at the time, but the real reason is there's definite emotion there. And I love those little hints that we get of that throughout the book.
Yeah, when I became a Star Trek fan, I somewhat had an issue thinking, why would Sarek marry a human woman? How could he fall in love? They don't really have emotions. But over time, as I've gotten familiar with these characters and have read the books and seen all the shows and gotten to know Sarek better, it starts to make sense. And this book really fleshes that out. We learn that Sarek was previously married to a Vulcan, and that didn't work out. And then he meets Amanda, and as we all know, Vulcans really do have emotions. And there's almost like this way that they kind of let love kind of surface a little, but not let it get too crazy. But I also found it fascinating that they would marry so quickly. They fell in love so quick and got married really quick too, which to me, I just wouldn't think a Vulcan would do that, but it seemed to work with them. And the journal entries that Amanda writes about her feelings and how, because what we see in this book is Sarek, is reading journal entries that Amanda has made, and then we see what happened at that event through his perspective. So we're getting her perspective first and then his second, and it really melds well together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love the way that they would do that, have something that's on the page and then go into Sarek's recollection of it. And what's really striking is all of these private moments that you see. I mean, by its nature, a journal is something that's more private, but you're also getting more into Sarek's thoughts and into these recollections of these private moments, and you're seeing all of these frictions and tensions that happen over the course of their whole relationship over 60 plus years. And it's really something, all of the insights that you get and all of the extra information you get around things that you see on screen. And that's what I like too. It's like you were seeing this private world that you don't normally have access to. And actually, after I reread the book, I went back and kind of rewatched all the places where you see Mark Leonard as Sarek, and it's not a lot in the whole canon of Star Trek, all of the episodes and movies. I mean, I probably was able to watch it in a couple hours or something like that. I mean, so there's not so much that you see. So seeing it fleshed out in this book was really great. I mean, I felt like you know his character and Amanda so much better, and it adds all of these shades to Spock's character as well. It was really great for that.
And even some of the little things, like the one that really struck me, and I'm not giving too much away about this actual story here. It's kind of in a flashback bit. We learn that Amanda was the impetus for Sarek to go to Kirk after Spock had died and see if Spock had left his Katra with him. And that scene, it was just so great with Amanda bursting in and saying, you have to see, you have to try, Sarek, if Spock would have found a way. And then just that line is echoed by Kirk in Star Trek 3. And it was just, the author captured those moments so well. And it makes perfect sense that, that would be the reason that Sarek would go to Kirk, because, it seems like kind of an emotional plea. And, that his human wife with this totally human heart that she has would be the impetus for that. Was really cool.
Yeah, I love that specifically the example that you gave.
I also like the weaving in of stuff that we didn't know canon-wise, like later on. So Star Trek 5, we learn that Sarek was married to a Vulcan princess, which is a weird term in and of itself, and we learn the reason for that in this book. They kind of retcon that a little bit. And, being able to weave in previously unknown characters in the canon that were a part of Sarek's life is definitely something that we might see more of in the near future. So, it's kind of, people complain about things like that, but that template is there. I mean, retconning things in a long-standing continuity is kind of a tradition. So, I think the author really made it work here.
And for all of these journal entries, I mean, because they take place in, different periods of time, it'll flip, 7 or 10 years or more. And I was like, in that journal, there are entries about Michael Burnham. I was thinking that as I read it. There is space in there for that because they're only talking about this certain slice of the story, right?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, of course, the novel was written, 20 plus years ago before Discovery. And I thought, would this novel hold up after Discovery comes on and we know more about Michael Burnham and her relationship with Sarek? And I think it would. And I say that because this book isn't the history, this isn't the biography of Sarek. This is certain touch points in his life, and more so his relationship with Amanda, thus his relationship with his son, Spock. but it touches more on the current relationship of Sarek and Spock and not as much about their history. I mean, we get some history of, when he was growing up a little bit, but what I'm getting at is it doesn't cover every relationship that Sarek has had with someone in his life. The focus is on the three. It's Spock, Amanda, and Sarek. And it's really happening in this period of time after the undiscovered country. And I don't think Michael Burnham would be someone who would be missed from this novel if somebody was reading this years from now after Discovery's been on the air for however long. Right.
And I mean, you can kind of squint and make it work too, where, she was probably there in some parts, just she wasn't relevant to this story that they wanted to tell. So,
and who knows, they could have had other kids that they've helped foster or grow up that we don't even still know about.
By the time Star Trek's 100 years old, maybe they'll have 20 human children that they've warded over the years.
Well, and I mean, I was also thinking there's a little small reference to Sybok in here, and I'm like, that reference would never have been there without Star Trek V, right? I mean, it was something that was just kind of added into the picture, like, oh yeah, that's always been there. And I mean, you could do a novel or a Discovery novel that includes things with Sarek and Michael Burnham and all that. I think it would work because there are all of these gaps, like 7 years, 10 years, 20 years here and there, and there's a lot of stuff that's happening in their lives, but they're just focusing on and thinking about things really related to Amanda and Spock. So it makes sense. So I was thinking about that also, like, okay, is this still going to fit? And I think it will. I think it really will.
Well, there's another character that is included in this book. He's someone that we've seen a little bit of in Star Trek IV and Star Trek VI specifically, and he gets a name in this novel. I don't know if he's named elsewhere. In the movies, he's just called the Klingon Ambassador, and we get Kamarag. So he's this Klingon ambassador who famously in Star Trek IV addressed the Federation Council and said, "There shall be no peace as long as Kirk lives." And so what did you guys think about his character in this book, without getting into too many spoilers yet, but his kind of fleshing out in this story?
Well, I have to admit that, as I was reading the story and even rereading it, I think because he didn't get a name in those movies, I didn't even make the connection. And then you mentioned on the outline, and I was like, oh yeah, that guy. But his character was very interesting because it was like this ambassador that is so kind of belligerent and ready to make war and to really stir things up. So I thought that was very interesting. And of course, if you tie it back to what he says in Star Trek IV, then it's kind of trying to make good on his promise, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And I'm with you, Justin. I eventually picked up on who it was, but I guess in the first few chapters or whatever, I didn't make the connection until later. And then I realized, oh wait, we're talking about that guy from 4 and 6. But I also didn't feel like he felt like that character. Like, I mean, I know that he was in the movies the Klingon ambassador is very much like, I want the head of Kirk, but he didn't seem like a warrior type. And this one, he felt more like the traditional Klingon warrior with honor type. At least that's how I was picturing him when I was first reading the book. So I kept having to adjust my thoughts to what we saw of the character in the movies. And I thought, well, he, I don't know. I just didn't feel like, even though we didn't get a lot of him in the movies, he just didn't feel like he would be the same character. So it felt a bit of a stretch to me. But considering the circumstances of the book and, the control he was under, then yeah, it could work. But it felt a little off to me.
Yeah, I felt kind of the same way you did, Bruce. And like you say, the book kind of offers some explanation that you can use to make that make sense. But yeah, I had the same feeling that, when he was calling for, I think in Star Trek IV, he says, we demand the extradition of Kirk. We demand justice. He's speaking for the Klingon Empire. He's not, I didn't get the impression that he personally loathed Kirk. But I mean, I guess it's possible. And of course, that gets stirred up in this. The funny thing that I noticed was the little ways that the author lets you know who this character is. There's just a few little lines that echo his lines in Star Trek IV. And my favorite was, at some point, some character in this book refers to him as a pompous ass. And and I always remember this because it's the weirdest line in Star Trek IV when Sarek faces him down in front of the Federation Council and he storms out. There's just like one guy on the Federation Council yells out, "You pompous ass!" It's just, I love that line.
Yeah.
It's so
it almost feels like an outtake that they kept
place.
in, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's so front and center, like it's so obviously meant to be heard loud. It just seems really weird. And I love that A.C. Crispin used the line pompous ass in this book to refer to him. I'm like, okay, yeah, it's definitely that guy. Awesome. Well, the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about before we get into the really spoilery bits was we have a kind of fringe, what starts out as a fringe group on Earth. In the 20th century, kind of hard to imagine, but they have the KEHL, the Keep Earth Human League. And it's kind of this, I would say, right-wing group, keep Earth human, expel foreigners, expel Vulcans specifically. And, this is something that's been explored in Star Trek a few times since. I mean, we have Terra Prime in Enterprise, John Frederick Paxton's group, kind of similar. And, I would even go so far to say as the neo-fascists that you hear about in the news today, these groups that are, in this case, it's keep Earth human. And in other cases, it's keep, America or keep Alberta or Canada white kind of thing. And it's funny to me, funny in quotes, that these groups continue to be relevant and these stories continue to be relevant as the years go by. What did you guys think of the Keep Earth Human League and their role in this story?
Well, I definitely, one of the first things I thought of was Terra Prime, because it does have feels like it has a lot of similarities to that group that you see in Enterprise. And then during the book, it says that the roots of this Keep Earth Human League go all the way back to First Contact in 2063. So for me, in my headcanon, I was like, there was some resistance and a certain movement, and then that kind of developed toward Terra Prime in the 22nd century, and then it became this Keep Earth Human League in the 23rd century. But, when I think about it, I think, okay, it's the 23rd century. People would have had exposure to species from other worlds for, hundreds of years now. I guess by this point, 330 years, like there's really still going to be that kind of resistance. So that felt a little bit odd, but I mean, within the book, I think they do give some explanation for why it becomes so important. But yeah, it was something that was striking, and it is striking that those things seem relevant, and it makes you wonder, if we do make first contact with an alien species, there would probably be, some group of people that would be like, why are these people on our world? They need to get out, So it'll have some relevance in the future, if and when that happens too. It's very, very interesting.
It's been an odd few years for me in Star Trek and what's going on in the world. The thing that's really come to what I recognize now is, as I think things have changed for certain areas and have gotten better, I think it just gets quiet and then it gets loud again. And then you find out maybe things haven't gotten better on that one issue or that one topic, and it just keeps rearing its ugly head. And I've always thought of Star Trek as being this utopia, like, oh, we'll get over those kind of things by the 22nd and 23rd and the 24th centuries and so on and so forth. But yet then you read a book like this and it's in the 23rd century and here's people who are against aliens. I mean, one of the leaders of this group is African American. And you would think that, he comes, from a history and a family background that, where other people were treating them as not equals and wanted them out. And now he's doing that with alien species on Earth. And it's like, how can this be going on in the 23rd century? Haven't you people learned anything from your own history? And now you're turning around and doing it to these other aliens. And what about this utopia society that we have on Earth apparently in Star Trek, and everyone talks about, oh, I love Star Trek because of the message and how things will be in the future and it'll be a better place, but it keeps rearing its ugly head. So at first when I'm reading this, I'm like, no, there wouldn't be a group like this in this time frame. And then I thought, well, no, we keep seeing this stuff continue to happen, and maybe it'll get less and less over time. But at first I had a problem with it, but now I totally accept it. And it's sad to think that, I mean, I know this is fiction, but that you could have this, a group out there that is against other races and doesn't want them intermingled. Yeah, we had that in Enterprise, but now we're 100 years future and we still have it. So it's just, and it plays so well with what's going on today. And I thought, man, this book reads as if it just came out, like it was written this year.
Yeah, like if this had come out this year, you'd have a bunch of people saying, "Oh, that's being so totally reactionary to what's going on right now." And yeah, written in 1994. I mean,
and the original series
keeps happening.
there's episodes from the 60s where it's like, oh yeah, well back in the 60s, blah blah blah. That's why that episode's. And then you have comments when you talk to people and they say, that episode's still relevant today. It's kind of sad, but those issues are still going on.
Yeah, the way that I see it is that the future in Star Trek is better, but it's not perfect. And it's unrealistic to think that it would be perfect because, as people, as human beings, we've had, all of these hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years of evolution. And within a lot of that, there's been a certain advantage to being skeptical of what's different, or, people that are out there in a different tribe or something like that. And I think that those kinds of things where you've kind of been trained on this evolutionary scale to be, skeptical of what's different, or to even be opposed to it because you think it might be threatening, would still be there. So I feel like things would be better, but it's not going to be perfect. And if everything was perfect all the time and there was, no conflict at all, there wouldn't really be a story to tell. There has to be conflict from somewhere, and it has to be internal or external. And oftentimes within Star Trek, it's external, the Federation against some other planet or civilization. Although in the original series, you maybe see a little bit more internal, but I think that kind of thing would be there, and it would be a constant struggle to get better and get toward the perfection that you can never actually reach,
So, but isn't that what Gene Roddenberry is trying to do with The Next Generation? It was hard for the writers to write conflict because everyone in the Federation or the Starfleet or the crew all get along and everybody's accepting and whatever. So, Justin, I'm going to ask you, if A.C. Crispin handed this as a script to Gene Roddenberry, do you think he would accept this concept of the story?
Oh, you mean with like the Keep Earth Human League?
Yes.
I would say during the Next Generation era, no, he would reject it because he wouldn't see that those kinds of things would happen internally and that the conflict would have to come from some external foe. No, so yeah, I think he would definitely have rejected it in that era. Yeah. But I think that's kind of unrealistic because, in the Next Generation era, the Federation has expanded to the point where we're told at one point there's 150 member worlds. It's across 8,000 light years. It's huge, and there's got to be, some variation or some conflict there somewhere. We're just not seeing it week to week in the Next Generation era. That's the way I think about it.
Right, and in this book this is also in the era where we had the Undiscovered Country, where there's prejudice from our own Enterprise crew with Klingons, and they had to overcome that. And I heard Gene didn't like that part of the script. He couldn't override it. He didn't have any creative control over that movie, but I know he didn't like it. So I think you're right. In as much as we want everything to be perfect in the future and in Star Trek, I think it's important that we show that it's not always perfect. We're only human.
Yeah, it is important. And, when I tell people why I like Star Trek, one of the reasons I give is because it's a better future. I never say it's because it's a perfect future, because it can't be. It can't be perfect. And, I mean, truthfully, like, if everything was perfect and there was no conflict anywhere, then I don't know if life would be that interesting to live in some way, because through some of that, I mean, of course, we don't want conflict to happen where, people are dying or there are terrible wars or things like that, but where there's conflict between ideas and ways that people are interested in having society progress is very interesting, and that's the way that you get to something better sometimes, I think.
That said, sometimes after some of the messages I see online, I wouldn't mind giving that world a try still.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I totally see what you're saying here for sure. And I guess in a world where you have freedom of thought, people are going to have thoughts that differ from, what you would consider to be right or good, because someone else's idea of what's right or good is going to be different. And, unfortunately that pendulum does swing, I think. And, what's interesting, and I think at this point, I'm going to say we're going to get into spoilers because there's, to really discuss what's going on with this group, we kind of got to get into spoiler territory here. So from this point forward, if you haven't read the book and you don't want to be spoiled, you might want to click us off and go read that and come back. But so the Keep Earth Human League is kind of being prodded telepathically by various leaders and parts of the group are being influenced to, their xenophobic tendencies are being amplified and that sort of thing. And so that's really playing a big part in this. It's amplifying that. It's making it more, to the surface rather than, what goes underneath. But what's interesting to me is when the crisis is over and everything's passed and that's negated, it doesn't say that the group goes away. It just returns to the fringes. So, it's on one hand sad to me that there will always be those fringe groups, but at the same time, like I said, with freedom of thought, you're going to get those things. So
it's almost like they play them off as like they're a nice racist group. They're safe.
Yeah, I mean, as weird as that sounds, that kind of makes sense.
And it's interesting that they think of it in terms of how many people are espousing these thoughts or how big it is, because oftentimes these things can be very destructive, even if it's just believed in by a small group of people that are taking certain actions. So I thought that was an interesting choice to say, oh, it's going back to its previous small fringe numbers, but that can be very dangerous as well. If they're willing to, commit violence and to do certain things to overturn what the majority of people have agreed should happen in society. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting, and I don't think in the next generation era we quite see something like this group, right? As far as I can think of, but
yeah, nothing that I can really.
Yeah, I can't. There may be, but I can't think of anyone. You should call Amy Nelson.
Hey, I'm on Earl Grey. I've seen all of Next Generation and everything in the Next Gen era. I just can't think of anything, but maybe there is, or there's some book out there. But yeah, it seems like it's saying like, oh, this is just going to kind of fade away, so you don't have to think about it. Yeah, but one of the things that I actually thought about that was maybe an interesting parallel is when I was reading this book, I thought back to one of my favorite books, Spock's World, where Vulcans are trying to secede from the Federation because in some ways they think that, they've outlived the usefulness of the Federation. So it's kind of like a Keep Vulcan League or something like that. So like in some of the other books like that one, I think you do see like a variation on this theme, but in that book, it's from a very different perspective, but it's the same kind of sentiment. Like, we don't need these outsiders and these other people. And I mean, that's a really excellent novel, but it kind of surprised me at first, like, whoa, what is going on here? That these founding members of the Federation are interested in leaving. But yeah, it was interesting to see that play out like on Earth in this book. So
talking about the Keep Earth Human League, we get to Peter Kirk. So Kirk's nephew we see him briefly in the episode Operation Annihilate as a child. He's now a cadet at Starfleet Academy, and he's studying to take his Kobayashi Maru test. He's raring to get out there on starships, typical driven cadet. And he kind of encounters this Keep Earth Human League when they're demonstrating outside the Vulcan consulate, and he's going there to hopefully meet Ambassador Sarek, one of his personal heroes, And he kind of gets caught up in this group, ends up fleeing with them when they go to get arrested, kind of thing, because he's kind of in the middle of it and doesn't want to be arrested as a member of this group. So, and figures he's going to infiltrate them, and basically he gets, so long story short, he figures he's going to infiltrate them, gathers some information, reports it to Starfleet. And of course, because a number of people throughout Starfleet and various areas are under telepathic, I guess, control or influence, he's found out and then captured by the Klingons, the previously mentioned Kamarag, and he's being held hostage basically to lure Kirk, because Kamarag has this huge vendetta against Kirk. But while he's held hostage, he encounters Kamarag's niece, Valdir, and they kind of strike up a very interesting relationship between the two of them. And I thought we might talk a little bit about this part of the novel, because it's a very interesting part of this novel, and in a lot of ways, one of the most interesting parts to me to read. So what are you guys' thoughts on this aspect of the story?
Yeah, I liked this aspect, the Peter Kirk Valdir relationship, and it struck me as something that was almost like a commentary on what's possible in this world after the Khitomer conference that you see in Star Trek VI, because also for Valdir, the Klingon woman, her father was Krug, and feels that Kirk was responsible for her father's death, and then for Peter Kirk, his cousin David was killed by the Klingons headed by Krug, but they kind of in the course of the novel kind of move beyond that and actually kind of strike up a love relationship, which is very interesting. It feels like there's, this newer generation that is willing to get past some of those older animosities and see what the possibilities of things are. So I found that really interesting to see it develop and some of the hostility on both sides kind of break down and to understand each other kind of over time.
Yeah, their relationship is definitely for me a highlight of this book, which was a surprise to me, because at first I was kind of like, well, let's get back to Sarek and what's going on there. But this part of the story really started to become a centerpiece for me. I just want to make one quick little thing. Her father wasn't actually Krug. Her father was a member of Krug's crew, who was described as very honorable and that sort of thing. So
okay, I read the wrong information on Memory Beta, I guess.
Oh, Memory Beta, oh man.
Well, and I was reading through it and I was like, okay, I know her uncle is Kamarag, right? The ambassador.
Yeah, that's right.
But then I caught a reference in there about Krug's crew, but then I was looking up some information. I was like, oh, really? Okay. but anyway, still,
got to watch those guys.
Yeah. But anyway, still, somebody whose father was killed in that whole incident with Kirk that you see and Krug that you see in Star Trek 3, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And I love that they weave that history into it too, which is, really interesting, especially since we've gotten the Prey trilogy a few months ago too. That was kind of all ringing in my head as we were reading this, and, Krug's family line and stuff. So it was really interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
Yeah. And Valdir, I thought, just as a character in and of herself, was really, really fascinating to me. She was, I don't know, somebody that was really cool to read about. And I kept wanting to, I don't know, she's a really good in to Klingon culture, I think, in this book, which is something that we didn't get a lot of in the TOS era and that sort of thing. So it was really cool to have that explored as well.
Yeah. And, I really love the relationship between the two, and I think it's a great analogy to what's happening with humans and Klingons at this time. I will say though, when the romantic interest started to happen, where Peter was looking at her and really finding her attractive. The thing about it is I was really picturing her as kind of a hideous looking Klingon woman. And then he starts talking about how beautiful she is. I was like, oh, I need to adjust what I'm picturing in my head here. But, and then they Peter keeps up with her, they get it on, and it gets a little rough, and good for him.
What's kind of funny, we were talking a little bit on the other side of the page, the whole way that Peter Kirk gets in with the Keep Earth Human League is this, kind of second lieutenant, I guess, in that league is, an attractive woman, of course. And we keep hearing Peter Kirk's inner monologue saying like, well, I'm no Jim Kirk, like I'm not my uncle, but maybe I can turn on the charm a little bit. And, he woos this woman in the Keep Earth Human League, and then he and Valdir fall in love. I don't know. I think it's just a genetic thing with the Kirks. He's modest. He doesn't think he's got this, but man, he's really pulling a lot of Jim Kirks here.
I think so. Yeah, he doesn't think he's a Kirk, but in the course of the book, he really is. I mean, except for what he decides to do at the end, but pretty much.
Well, yeah, we're in spoiler territory now, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay, you know what?
Deep in it.
Okay, he's not as good with the women as his uncle is, but he's got that Kirk side of him. But I will say this: besides that, the whole Kobayashi Maru, he's the second Kirk to accomplish the Kobayashi Maru, just does not work for me.
It doesn't, because for me it totally worked. I was like, oh, this is pretty brilliant what he's doing, taking all the things that he learned on the mission, and I
thought that was brilliant. Yeah. No, I do. I really enjoyed that chapter. I just don't like the fact that because I like to think that James Kirk is the only one to conquer this training situation here of the Kobayashi Maru. Oh, now his nephew can do it too. That's what that just didn't like. But it was a good chapter.
He even does it better than Kirk because he doesn't need to reprogram the computers.
Exactly.
He doesn't need to. He just needs to sacrifice himself. That's all.
Yep. No.
Yeah, it was pretty brilliant. He didn't have to cheat. He just kind of found this loophole in there, and they're like, whoa, hey, what are you doing? I love how they just stop the program, and they're like, how? And they just walk him through it. It was awesome. I like that. But you're right. It does take down Jim Kirk's accomplishment a peg.
I could almost see, the next generation of Kirk kind of going forward. And I mean, he does end up taking a career path different from Jim Kirk, but at the same time, I could see this Kirk making a name for himself in the next, few decades kind of thing. So, that Kirk name continues on forward. I don't know. I think the family line's in good hands here.
I think so, and that makes me curious because again, there are a lot of novels I haven't read. I mean, is there anything else about this Peter Kirk character or the kind of Kirk lineage going forward, or not so much?
I don't recall. Do you, Dan? I was just wondering that myself.
Yeah, not that I know of, but at the same time, there are tons of novels I haven't read either. So, hey, listeners in the Babel Conference, if you know of any future Kirk progeny that we need to be made aware of, let us know for sure. So the other big aspect of this story, of course, the novel being Sarek, is, Sarek and his relationship with Amanda. And in this novel, we learn that she is terminally ill. She's quite old and she's dying. And Sarek ends up having to leave her close when she's, going to be dying fairly soon, they assume, to pursue his diplomatic duties because the president calls upon him to mediate this dispute where basically Klingon raiding parties have been crossing the border and capturing planets, and one in particular he has to go and try to free. So this, causes a rift between him and Spock. And I was curious, I see here in the notes, how would you define Sarek and Spock's relationship post the Undiscovered Country, and then in this case after Amanda's death? Because, of course, while he is away, she does pass away. And Spock is, in his Vulcan way, furious with Sarek over this. Do you think Spock's too emotional and less understanding of Sarek's logic, or which side do you kind of fall on here in this dispute?
Well, when I think about Spock in this book and his reaction to his mother's death, he's not overly emotional on the surface, but it's indicated that he really is suffering, which made me think of, him dealing in the Kelvin timeline, the destruction of Vulcan and then the loss of his mother. And his emotional outbursts were really more on the surface in the Kelvin timeline because there was just so much devastation that he's dealing with. And this one, it's not nearly as bad. It wasn't like an instant death that was unexpected. He knows that she's dying, but still, it touches on the idea that Vulcans do have emotions and he's struggling with it. Sarek himself doesn't seem to struggle as much. He is fine with the idea that, I'm needed elsewhere, Amanda. The needs of the many. And I'm trying to help this other planet. I have a diplomatic mission I need to take care of. And even though others could maybe fill in that space and do it instead of him, well, he was the one called to it and he would probably be the best at it. And it's the logical thing to do. And Spock recognizes that, in his opinion, I don't care if it's logical. Your wife needs you. She's dying. It's you that's going to help her get through this. And she's going to die sooner if you're not here. And I guess the thought for me is that it just shows that Spock is maybe more in touch with his emotions and realizes that it's not always logic. And he has a better balance than I think Sarek does. But I think Sarek comes to realize that, but Spock really does show anger towards his father. Again, not like shouting anger, but he's really angry at his father. And I thought, oh my gosh, now we're going back to how things used to be. There's always seems to be a rift. Like they always just seem to be on the edge. Like they're getting along and then just one little thing and then they kind of break apart and then they'll eventually maybe come back together. So, I mean, I like the whole aspect of the relationship between the two. It wasn't like they're not speaking to each other again. They're mad or they have a disagreement, but then they come back together in the end.
Yeah. And I think it's pretty striking. There was actually, some parts in it where I'm like, wow, the way that Spock is speaking to Sarek is pretty amazing how angry he is. I mean, there was one part in particular I wanted to read where, Sarek is about to leave. He's explained it to Amanda, who, interestingly seems fine with it and to understand. And Spock, sees that Sarek's going to leave, and he says, "You actually intend to leave her in her present condition? I must. The needs of the many outweigh the needs. To quote an appropriate human phrase, to hell with that. You cannot leave her like this. I recall a time when you chose to remain at your post, when only you could save my life. Yes, but I have grown since then. It is a pity you have not." I'm like, wow, he's incredibly angry and expressing it in his own way to an extent that I don't know if I've really seen before, in the Prime timeline. I think there's something for Spock about his mother that touches a certain point that almost nothing else seems to, that really makes him very, very angry. And it, in some ways it just seems like, would he really react like that? But it seems like it's this special case, like his mother is this really kind of special part of him, and he feels like she's not getting the respect that she deserves and what she needs as her life is ending. And he's very angry with Sarek. It worked for me, and I thought it was actually pretty powerful how it was written that he's expressing it this way.
And I mean, Leonard Nimoy's Spock, especially at that point, could do that really cold fury really well. And we've only seen it like in very short little bursts. And the way I pictured his face in this scene, but, through the whole scene was, do you remember in Star Trek 6 when Valeris has the phaser and, he says, you have to shoot. If you are logical, you must. And, she doesn't. And he just smashes the phaser out of his hand, and just for like half a second his face is like that, and I like, it's just for like a half second, but here it's very much on the surface. And yeah, that scene was chilling. Like, I think Leonard Nimoy's Spock could be like that. That's a Vulcan mic drop.
Yeah. It's like a serious Vulcan burn. Like, wow.
And I mean, it's obvious his mother, and it's pointed out, is his weakness here. And I think Amanda herself in her journals talks about her being Spock's emotional weakness and that sort of thing. And that what it brings out between the two of these men. And I think also Sarek, on the surface is very unemotional, but we get glimpses into his psyche, and he is, going through as much of an emotional strain as a Vulcan who, follows Sarek can, inside, and there's a lot of depth to Sarek here, and a lot more than I would have expected having watched him on television. Even in those quiet little emotional moments we might have seen over the years, I never really expected this kind of depth of feeling out of him. And Sarek would be the first one to, upbraid me for even suggesting such a thing, but it's definitely there. And, it's, I think, really a really fundamental, interesting part of his character in this book.
Oh, you're talking about for Sarek and what we see from him?
Yeah, and his love for his wife and his emotional turmoil at not being able to be there. And by emotional turmoil, it's all relative, obviously. Like, he's very calm, very collected outside, but inside you can tell he's, for a Vulcan, very off-center and very upset by it. And upset in quote marks.
Yeah.
As upset as he can be.
As upset as he can be at that point, I guess, because, in seeing some of what Sarek goes through in this and those like little touches of emotion that you may not see elsewhere, I mean, I couldn't help but think of the episodes where Sarek appears in The Next Generation, where he's really losing his control. That emotion is getting out. So it almost felt like you're seeing the little bits that kind of surface from time to time, but that when a Vulcan loses control can just become something so much greater. And it, I think in those Next Generation episodes, you get to see maybe some more depth or more about like Sarek's character and who he is than you may have seen in some of the other glimpses. But in this book, it's like 10 times as much, but in subtle ways that kind of surface at different parts through this novel. And I like that they were just kind of using little bits here and there in the journal entries and the thoughts in the midst of all this action and the other things that are going on with the Klingons and all of that. It felt like it was almost like the author was just painting little bits, at a time, every 5 or 10 pages or 20 pages or something like that, that when you thought about it as a whole, painted this really interesting picture of Sarek that you hadn't seen before.
Well, and I think it's important to also mention Amanda. And Justin, you said earlier about how she was more accepting about Sarek leaving than Spock was when he was going on that mission. And that says a lot about Amanda, because she's a human and she gave up everything on Earth, moved to Vulcan, like just cold. I don't even think she'd ever been to Vulcan until she was marrying Sarek. And she learns later how well she was accepted into the society and that it is her home, to the point that when Sarek is leaving her as she's dying on death's bed, and he says, I must do this. I have something I need to go do. It's only logical. And she accepts that. Yes, you're correct. That's the Vulcan thing to do. Go ahead. I'm okay with it. And Spock, who's the half Vulcan, has the issue with it. It's not Amanda that does. So in a lot of ways, Amanda is handling logic in this situation better than the Vulcan Spock is.
And I think there's an interesting difference between the two of them, though, because for the most part, Amanda has been on Vulcan for more than 60 years, and Spock, for the most part, in the previous, 40 years or so, has gone off to Starfleet, has served on ships, has come back to Vulcan from time to time, but hasn't been, like, Amanda has been on Vulcan, I think, for the most part, surrounded by Vulcans in her everyday life. And Spock has been away from Vulcan for the most part, surrounded by non-Vulcans. So it almost feels like there's that different influence on the two of them, even though, you know, the makeup of their genetics is different.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of that angle, that, you know, Amanda, yeah, like you said, surrounded by Vulcans, and Spock, who's trying to be a Vulcan, is definitely under the influence of humanity and other races and that sort of thing. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that.
But, you know, she probably has a better balance between Vulcan logic and human emotion, more so than her son Spock, who is half Vulcan, half human. Because even when Spock decides that he is going to Starfleet and Sarek doesn't like it, and the way Sarek treats Spock, she leaves him. She leaves Sarek and goes to Earth. I mean, she's a strong-willed woman. She knows what needs to be done, what's right and wrong. And even though she's angry at him, at the same time, I think she realizes the logical thing to do is to leave him at this moment and go join Spock on Earth and see him go through the academy.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad the author made that choice too, because I thought that was a very defining moment for Amanda. And this is all kind of revealed through those journal entries in flashback, basically. But yeah, it makes sense. You know, I don't know that I would respect the decision to stay after that had happened, at least in the immediate aftermath, because I think what Sarek did to Spock was so like, I don't want to say over the top, but it was very egregious, and, you know, basically calling him banished from Vulcan and you know, not allowed to come back. And, you know, for a parent of a child, or of a young, you know, adult child who you love, you know, I don't think I would have respected her really if she had decided to stay then and there. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but
yeah, it does. And I mean, I really like that part where, you know, you get the explanation for why Sarek and Spock haven't talked for so many years by the time you get to Journey to Babel, because of his decision to go to Starfleet. Seeing that whole confrontation is really interesting. That Amanda, you know, leaves for almost a year is really something. But it also adds something to Sarek's character, because, you know, when I think it's Sarek's father dies, and, you know, Amanda is talking to Pow, I think, about, you know, how Sarek is doing. You know, to Pow says, well, you know, he grieves for his father, but he grieves 100-fold for you. And she's like, really? You know, I mean, that really says something about Sarek, that, you know, he is feeling like emotional and grieving for what at the time seemed like, you know, the end of this great relationship of you know, being together with Amanda. And I was like, wow, that just in saying that says so much about, you know, it's almost like if Spock is, I'm sorry, if for Spock, Amanda is like his weakness that can make him really emotional or angry. It's like for Sarek, Amanda is also almost like this emotional weakness that makes him feel more than he does for others or in other ways. It's very interesting.
I'm really glad you brought up that scene. I love that scene with T'Pau. That I actually just recently rewatched Amok Time, and so I had her right in my head while I was reading that, and that was such a good scene. For even though Sarek isn't in that scene, the emotional depth that it adds to Sarek's character is just great. I loved that scene.
Mm-hmm, yeah, but it's like he wasn't in that scene, but his presence was definitely there, hanging over
Exactly.
all of it, and it told you so much about him just by what T'Pau was saying about him, more than if he had said it himself. I mean, the way that was put together, I think, was really brilliant, having that little scene there.
Well, we've spent most of this time talking about the character moments and the characters in this story. The main plot really is kind of almost a background to what's going on with the characters we know and love. So I'm going to kind of blow through this main plot really quickly here. There's a planet called Freeland, and Sarek's been negotiating with them for years. And it turns out that they're actually kind of under the aegis of the Romulan Empire. And there's this long-term plan to invade the Federation, basically. I'm simplifying it, but that's basically it. And the Freelands, most of them are actually secretly kidnapped Vulcans over many years. And Sarek and Spock have to convince Terran, who is this Freeland, in quotes, that Sarek has been negotiating with for all these years, to return these captured Vulcans back to Vulcan. And like I said, I'm really simplifying this plot, but by the end, a number of these Vulcans decide to remain underground on Freeland and continue to be a part of Romulan society. And by the end of the novel, we're left with this really interesting hook that kind of connects it to unification in TNG when Spock meets Pardek, who, of course, is the Romulan senator in unification. And he and Pardek kind of speculate that, the Vulcans remaining in Romulan society might have some sort of effect. And, they've been able to be in Romulan society all this time. A door may be opened here to some sort of reunification in the future. Did you guys think that was a little too on the nose, or did you appreciate that kind of connective tissue here?
I appreciated it because, it's a little too on the nose, but I really liked it because we're seeing Vulcans who were already integrated into a Romulan society and may not, of course, been really aware of it, that they were Vulcan, and they grew up as Romulan, and at the same time, they know who they are now. They have to integrate within the society, and it just is enough of a spark for Spock to say, well, if we have Vulcans and Romulans now living together, then there may be a chance that both races could live together as two different societies on two different planets and have a good relationship and have that bond again, which takes us all to the Next Generation episode of Unification. But what I also liked about this is if they expressed emotions, Sarek is basically laughing in Spock's face. Because Spock presents this idea to his father, and Sarek's like, there's basically no way that Romulans and Vulcans would ever get along. You're fooling yourself. And to the point then Spock's like so serious about that, his father's like, okay, well, if you believe that, maybe it could happen. It was just a very odd scene between the two of them. But again, it just shows, Spock has hope where Sarek doesn't. And, I don't know. I just kind of liked how that all got wrapped up.
Yeah, I like the connection to unification, but you know what it made me think of also? So with these Freelands, the Romulans have set up these people on this planet, played this long game for like 70 years in order to hopefully have the outcome to take over the Federation or weaken them in some way, right? And then at the end of the book, there's this link to unification. Pardek comes by and he's like, hey, Spock, wanted to give you some news. And, by the way, there might be some possibility of some unification or something somewhere in the future. And what I thought was like, okay, so are the Romulans again sowing the seeds for something that's supposed to, come to fruition 70 years hence in unification? Are they really like playing that long game again? It made me think about that, if that's what they were doing. And if so, it's like, wow, these guys are really patient,
Well, and that is basically what comes to pass in unification. Yeah. It turns out that Pardek all this time
75 years.
And not only are they incredibly patient with their long plans, these 70-year-long plans are undone in a single day.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's true.
By captains of the Enterprise. Right. Like, they must hate Kirk and Picard, because they just unravel their plans like nobody's business.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, there was indication in the book that that's what Romulans do. They're very patient. You know, they'll take a long time to get it to where they need to go. But yeah, that's funny that, oh, here comes an Enterprise captain. Ah, screw it. 70 years.
Son of a.
In one day.
I mean, you got to think after unification that they're like, okay, guys, we need to do a little study here. Should we do these 70-year plans anymore, or should we do something a little more quickly?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they're long-lived people like the Vulcans, but that's a little ridiculous for sure.
Who knows?
So this all brings us to basically the main reason we read this book was, we've got Star Trek Discovery, which just recently aired, and we've got the character of Sarek. So at the time of recording, I was about to say we haven't seen the episodes.
Most of us.
Most of us haven't seen the episodes. Bruce, you lucky something.
Yeah, they're saying that because I was at the premiere in Hollywood.
We're glaring at him right now.
Yes, but as this episode drops, you've seen it already.
Yes. My future self listening to this has seen it and can now think the same things Bruce will.
And not only have you seen it, but you love it.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've loved it. I've seen it like 16 times. Sure.
I'm sure the same is true for me as well. But on this side of the great divide of not having seen it yet, what do we think of how, Sarek is portrayed in this book? Do we think that will be consistent through Star Trek Discovery? Does this book kind of inform a little bit of how you're going to see Sarek when you watch Discovery? And Bruce, I know you're probably going to have to be a little careful when you're answering this because you have in fact seen it. So I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
It's an interesting question because, one of the reasons, of course, we're reading this now is because Sarek's going to have some importance, at least it seems in the first couple of episodes of Discovery. And I hadn't really thought forward after that, like how is this going to affect how I might see Sarek in Discovery? And I think it might. I mean, there might be moments where you might think back or see how something fits into the book. I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit hard to say at this point, not having seen it yet, except that I probably will think about it and some of the things that we learn about Sarek and his character, and wondering if it's consistent with that or if it's going for a different take, or who knows, maybe they'll throw in some things that disregard some of what's established in this book. We don't know. But it's definitely going to be on my mind for sure, and I'm glad that we did this and that I reread this book so it would be fresh in my mind when we see the first couple episodes.
This is really unique for me because I was in the middle of reading this book and then saw the first two episodes of Discovery and then came back to the book. So, but it didn't really change things too much to me because I think, I feel like we know the Sarek character. And even though I feel like we've gotten a little more in-depth information, we've learned a little more about him in this book, the character didn't really change that much for me. So then looking at Discovery, Sarek is Sarek in Discovery also. So what happened then when I went back to reading the book, I almost started to get the two mixed up. Like I started to get to the point where I don't mean just the actors, but I started to think, well, wait. The thing I'm just thinking about right now that Sarek said, I think that was in Discovery, not this book. Like I started to get them confused because I do really feel like in Discovery, Sarek is represented correctly and it's the Sarek that we know real well. And that characterization, I think, melds well with this book. So I think the two complement each other really well.
Were you tempted to draw James Frain as Sarek on the cover of your book after you saw the premiere?
No, I didn't want to draw him, but I should have taken my Sarek book in there and had him sign it. That would have been interesting.
That's a neat idea. That would have been kind of cool, actually.
You'd probably say, I didn't know there was a book about my character.
Yeah, that is probably what he would say. I was going to say, I wonder if, there's some sort of influence from this book, if he's been made aware of it.
I don't know. I mean, if people on Discovery are reading the final reflection, then anything's possible for what they're going into.
That's true.
He may have read this, yeah.
That'd be an interesting question to ask him for sure. I suspect the answer would probably be no, but I would still be interested.
It's always possible. He could have listened to the audiobook too.
That's a good point. And actually, I wanted to bring up the audiobook. I did not listen to the audiobook for this one, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I've had it recommended several times since I've mentioned that I've been reading this book. Will Wynn, in particular, would probably strangle me if I didn't mention the audiobook. He brings it up a lot on Facebook and that sort of thing. It's narrated by Mark Leonard and is apparently very, very good. So, if you get the chance to listen to the audiobook for Sarek, leave a comment in the Babel conference on the show post for this and let us know what you think. I don't think any of us listened to the audiobook, did we?
No, for me, when I've been reading these books, it's the kind of thing where I have to read them. I'm never really in a setting where an audiobook actually makes sense, unfortunately. So I haven't gotten that experience, but I have definitely heard from a lot of people that this one's great, and there are a lot of others that are really great. So, if it's possible, definitely check it out.
Well, probably I'd love to hear your guys' final thoughts and rating for Sarek. So, Justin, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah, it's interesting rereading this novel because there's only a couple of Trek novels that I've reread at this point. So the first time that I went through it a couple of months ago, I was like, wow, this book is really amazing. I love it. There's a lot of great stuff going on. You learn so much about Sarek and Amanda and Spock. And, as we talked about Peter, Kirk, and Valdir, really interesting characters. They do some interesting things with Kamarag. There's all this stuff going on, right? And in rereading it, the thought that I had was all of that stuff is great, but and I think you indicated this a little bit, Dan, when you kind of skip past it. What's supposed to be the main part of the action with the Freelands and this whole Romulan plot, it made me wonder, because this is like a 400-page book, right? It made me wonder if some of that was cut back and there was even more that was about Sarek and Amanda and Spock and, the Klingons dealing with the aftermath of Star Trek VI, if it would have been even better. That there was something in rereading it. Like the first time it was really exciting, like, wow, what's happening? And they're going all over the place. But my interest wandered a little bit in those parts that were about this Freeland plot and all of the stuff that was going on with that. So I think I would have liked to see more actually about Sarek than we got. I mean, we got quite a bit, but it wasn't quite as much the focus as I thought it might be. So that might affect my rating a little bit, but I would still give it 8 out of 10 angry Spocks.
Ooh. That's a charged rating for sure.
I mean that in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's interesting because when I first read it, I probably would have given it a 9 out of 10, but I think I took it down a peg because I was like, yeah, I don't know. It could have been structured a little bit different. That's not to say it isn't an excellent novel. This is one of the best Trek novels I think I've read, but I could just see those places where it could be improved and where I felt like I was kind of skipping through certain parts of what was supposed to be the main action and the main danger to the Federation.
Excellent. Bruce, what are your kind of final thoughts on this one?
I really enjoyed the book more than I thought. I've read some reviews where people are always comparing it to Spock's World, and I don't really think that's a fair comparison. I feel like Spock's World is more... I think it delves into Vulcan society more so than this. This is more about family. This is about Sarek, Amanda, and Spock for the most part. And yes, we do get some information about Vulcan society, and we get a Star Trek adventure and dealing with other cultures, trying to get along and such. But I really feel, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a love letter to the Sarek and Amanda characters. So on Goodreads, I gave it 5 stars out of 5, but it's probably more like 4.5, 4.70. I don't, maybe, yeah, like 4.7 or something, but I would definitely give this book to all of Sarek's children, no matter how many children he has.
Or adopted children.
Or adopted children, or stepchildren, or children he just walked by, whatever.
Excellent. Yeah, speaking as someone who's, reading this for the first time, I really enjoyed this book. The character moments with Sarek and Amanda were really, really well done. And I really found myself enjoying the secondary characters as well. The Peter Kirk character and his whole arc I thought was really interesting. Maybe the Kobayashi Maru bit on the end was a little bit, okay, felt a little bit tacked on, but at the same time gave a nice little wrap up to his character. And the main plot, like we talked about, there's a lot going on. There's the whole Freeland plan, there's the rescue on Kronos with crashing a shuttle, and like there is a lot of actiony stuff that happens in here, but to me that stuff all feels very secondary, very much a backdrop to the character story. Like Bruce, you said Sarek, Amanda, and Spock are kind of the main focus of this. And also, like I mentioned, I really loved that the journal aspect of the story, that kind of literary device to keep Amanda in the story even after she had passed away, with Sarek learning more about his wife than he knew when she was alive. And the idea of Spock eventually reading these journals as well is kind of heartwarming to me. Like I know it would just be a repeat of what we saw with the journals, but I'd love to see Spock reading these and his reaction to what's going on and that sort of thing as well. So, this story, I don't think I can give it less than, I would say, 5 out of 5 miniature stolen Klingon birds of prey. I really, really liked this one. All right. Well, Justin, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you on the interwebs or elsewhere, I guess, if you want them to stalk you in real life?
Well, no, I won't be giving out my home address today, but you can find me elsewhere on the network, co-hosting Earl Grey. That's our dedicated TNG podcast. I co-host that with Amy Nelson and Richard Marquez. We have a great time talking about TNG every week. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at TrekFan4747, where I tweet about nothing but Star Trek. And I'm currently tweeting out my TNG Season 3 rewatch. You can find me hanging around the Babel Conference on Facebook. And I also wanted to mention that there are a couple of Facebook groups that are dedicated to Star Trek novels that I participate in quite a bit, putting up book reviews and putting in a lot of comments, a lot of participation. That's the Star Trek Books discussion group, the Star Trek Books community group, and literally Star Trek. So you can find me there as well. Lots of places to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's always a pleasure to have you on.
Oh, it's great being here. Just such a pleasure reading the books, but then talking with someone about it is great, because usually I just read it and I'm like, okay, what's the next one? But so, yeah, it's nice to just talk about it in this setting.
Yep, that's what I've been done for 25 years, and now I finally get to talk to people about the books.
It's our own little mini Star Trek book club. I love it.
So I really enjoyed the fact that we're exploring these books from the past that don't, of course, when they're written, didn't have a connection to Discovery, but in some ways they do now, because Harry Mudd and Sarek are characters that are going to appear in Discovery, and it's fun to kind of go back to these books right now and just kind of get used to these characters from the book standpoint and see how that will fit well into the series.
Yeah, I think this one, to me anyway, this is just kind of a guess on my part, will have a little bit more relevance to Discovery than Mud in Your Eye did, for instance. I feel like, I don't know, the character of Sarek, he's a bit more consistent than Mud, and I feel like this one gave me some interesting insights that I'm really looking forward to kind of thinking about while we watch Discovery in a few days. And yeah, we'll see how that plays out. Of course, by the time this episode is out, you guys out there listening will already know, and puts an advantage over us.
I already know, Dan.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to ignore that fact.
Dan's bummed out. He can't wait.
No, actually, I'm thrilled for Bruce. If you corner him in the Babel conference, get him to tell you the story of how he got to go to the Discovery premiere. It really is something.
I think we're going to write a book.
I would definitely read that book. But getting into premieres in the unlikeliest of ways is not the only thing we've been talking about on Trek FM. So here's a quick look at some of the other things you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, Literary Treks.
Yeah, so Trip, of course, is working to take down Section 31. We as Star Trek fans who have watched all of the shows and read a bunch of other novels know how that's ultimately going to go. But in this story, he's, kind of convinced that Harris is Section 31, kind of the be-all and end-all. He's at the top. It's his own private little army that he's constructed, and Trip is aiming to take them down.
The 602 Club.
And this is happening a lot more in the Star Wars books, and I think it's because it allows them freedom, which is to do books that become character studies. And I think it's very clear that this book, in a lot of ways, is a character study of who this person is and what it is that causes the actions that we see in The Force Awakens to make more sense.
Stage 9, a podcast about the people who make Star Trek.
By getting people like Braga to come on board and work on this show, what they're going to be doing is deconstructing that thing that they did for all those years on Star Trek.
Earl Grey.
Is there anything else we need to add, or do we think that's the?
Are we going to cure Riker, or?
Oh shoot! I forgot about Riker. Yeah, sure, fine. We'll keep him around.
Yeah, we've cured Riker, and then for me, this would or not.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all of these shows and join the conversation about your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and a written review. Now, if you're not an Apple user, we got you covered. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and in most third-party apps. And you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
If you'd like to help us keep all of our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. We'd really appreciate your help. Visit patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/trekfm to get all of the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all of the details at patreon.com/trekfm.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways you can do that. And the best place is to join the larger conversation in the Babel Conference. It's our listeners group on Facebook. All you got to do is go to Facebook and type in Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. And if you'd like to send us an email, you can do that too by just going to our website at trek.fm/contact, and you can fill out the form. And that will be sent right to us once you choose Literary Treks. We'll get that email, and maybe we'll read it on the show. And you can also find us on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM.
And special for Literary Treks, you can find us on our Goodreads group, where we have bookshelves with all of our previously covered books, as well as the currently reading section, so you know what's coming up for future shows. Plus, there are great conversations happening about all the books and comics in the Star Trek universe. Just search for Literary Treks on Goodreads and click Join Group. We'd like to thank Ken Tripp, Greg Rozier, Brandon Shea Mutala, and Justin Oser for their support of the Trek FM network and for being associate producers for Literary Treks as well. Well, Bruce, when you're not negotiating with Klingon warlords who aren't really sure why they attacked that planet, where can we find you?
You can find me controlling their minds. I'm controlling the Klingons' minds. But you can find me on Twitter. And this is what I do. I control their minds to follow me on Twitter. I'm at Admiral_Rex. So that's where you can find me on Twitter. And you can also find me elsewhere here on the network on The Edge, on the Live from the Edge show, which is Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. And it's our live reaction to each episode of Star Trek Discovery. And you can find me talking Star Wars on the Star Wars Report podcast at starwarsreport.com. And of course, you can find me in the Babel Conference. And Dan, when you're not making love to a Klingon, where can people find you?
Wow. I didn't know that you knew about that. That's disturbing.
I just figured that's where the scars came from.
You noticed those, did you? I thought I wore the collar a little higher today. Well, when I'm not doing that, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Kurtrats. That's Kertrats. You can find me on youtube.com/Kurtrats Productions, where I talk about all things Star Trek and the Orville lately. You can also find me, of course, on the Babel Conference, responding to posts, posting things about Star Trek, all that sort of thing. Well, thank you all very much for listening, and until next time,
live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.